Okay, guys, we're going to get going. Sorry, everyone just got hello, thank you for coming this evening. I really appreciate it. It's a slightly different format for us tonight. We do these town halls every 3 or 4 months, and every time we seem to do them a bit differently. I think my team's helping me stave off dementia by getting me to do things in different ways at different times. But because the numbers are relatively small tonight, I didn't want to get up on the stage and talk down to you, so I thought I'd do it from down here. And given that we have a relatively small number of people here today, I'm hoping it can be a bit more interactive. Thank you for coming. So the first thing, just to preface it, the focus of tonight's discussion, and I hope it will be a discussion, not just a one-way sort of a situation, is the cost of living survey that many, many members of the community completed recently when we sent it out to every home in the community. We're going to talk about that. Going to talk a little bit about the recent budget, and then have the question and answer session, hopefully, on things that people would like to raise with me or talk about. So firstly, so we'll talk about the cost of living survey results, budget summary, and then questions and a reveal on who's coming next time. Firstly, let me acknowledge that we are on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people, and this land is unceded. And I pay my respects to all Aboriginal people, but particularly any Indigenous people who are here today, and to the elders past, present and emerging. It's a source of great pride for my team that Kooyong voted yes in the referendum last year. I remain committed to a process of reconciliation, and it's something I will work towards for as long as I'm the local member. I also want to thank all the individuals who came today to the Bring Your Bill session, and what we wanted to do is to test the water with that. We wanted to see to what extent people in Kooyong were looking for assistance with things like their water bill, electricity bill, services and the like. I think it was really well attended, and I'm very, very grateful to the many service organisations who came. Just talking to them as I was walking around the room, they were saying that it was really nice for them to meet other members of the community and to understand better what organisations are out there and what supports are there. I can see a very important member of the BCO up the back there. Hi, Natalie. It's one of the things you learn when you're in my position is, A, how many people are struggling, and we're going to talk about that in our community, but B, how many people are there to help and how many ways there are to reach out for help that many of us don't know about and don't access because we simply don't know that they exist. And that's one thing that my team and I have been concentrating on in the last couple of years, is understanding the wealth of supports that we actually do have available to us and try to understand how to put people in contact with those. Speaking of that, my team, many members of my team are here tonight. Julia, Max, Fiona and Peter. I'm very, very grateful to them for the support, but particularly to Tamar, who is the events coordinator and has put this event on us for us tonight. And I know it took a lot of work, particularly getting all the services organisations here, and I think it's been hopefully a really worthwhile thing for us to do. So I'll talk firstly about the cost of living survey, and I think it's probably fair to say that when I stood for election for the federal seat of Kooyong in early 2022, I don't think the phrase cost of living was spoken. It wasn't on the agenda. I would go so far as to say it wasn't really on the horizon, and it seemed like most people were in a reasonably good situation. It wasn't the sort of thing that people wanted to talk about. Then, of course, we saw very, very quickly after that election that things changed very quickly. Interest rates went up. People have had essentially static wages for a long time, and very, very quickly people started to struggle. And we've also at the same time seen an absolute crisis of housing affordability and availability in this country. And so for some people, I think there's a bit of a tsunami where we saw the housing problems, massive increases in the cost of things like energies, electricity in particular, but also fuel, and people who were operating on a pretty thin margin started to struggle very, very quickly. And so what we wanted to do in setting out this survey was to see where were the pressure points for our community, what people had front of mind, what they want me as their federal member to concentrate on, and what else they wanted to tell me. So we sent out a survey, and it was interesting actually. The Australian had a bit of an attack piece recently saying that people like me, they looked at a whole lot of different federal members and costs and how much we spend on postage, and they were having a go at us. But in fact, what we found with this, and these are these things that you learn as you go along, what we found is that about half of the surveys came in by mail, whereas a lot of people wanted to respond in different ways. And I think more and more what we're understanding is that people engage with the news and with local events now in lots of different ways, and you have to offer people different ways of communicating with you. So we sent the survey out by mail, by email and by social media, put on the social media platforms in February, and received 5,000 responses, which is pretty extraordinary from the electorate over the 3 or 4 months. And then had a number of volunteers who spent a lot of time compiling the data that had come in on the paper forms by hand. There were more than 50 volunteers involved in that process, but I want to give special thanks to Jennifer Quigley, to Jenny Bone, who's here tonight. I don't know if Jennifer's here. Marg Callanan, who's here. Caroline Leslie, who's here. There we are. And Peter Colbatch. Absolute stars, troopers. All I had to do was feed them pizza and point them at the surveys, but they're wonderful people, put lots of hours into this, and I'm very grateful to them for their help with it. So here are the results, and they're kind of interesting. So the first question that we asked people was the main issue that you're worried about now with respect to your future and that of your family and friends? And a quarter of the people, 26% of people, said climate change. And I think that was probably the number one concern for many people at the last federal election. That number may have fallen a little bit, but it still is very much front of mind for people. But then we did see the cost of living. 1 in 5 people, the one thing that they focused right in on was cost of living. For 12.5% of people, it was housing. For 12%, integrity in government and integrity around government spending and transparency of decision-making processes. For 7% of people, it was economy, the way that the government is managing its spending programs. About 6% said national security. 4% said education, and for about 3.5% there were other sorts of issues. Yes?
No mention of migration, the hot issue in the Australian and the Herald Sun. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's true. We didn't put migration as a tick box, but it was there was a potential for people to put in optional, responses. It didn't come up.
I think it's a beat up, but anyway.
Yeah. We can talk about that later. But it is interesting. It's not front of mind for most people. I do hear about it from people in the electorate. Quite often they ask me about my position on it and whether, I think that migration is currently excessive, and we can talk about that. But I don't think it's the front of mind issue for many people. And then asking people, well, when we talk about cost of living, because that was the focus of this survey, in what way does it concern you the most? And this is an interesting one, I think. And I think it reflects really very much the character of the people of Kooyong, which is that 40% of people, 2 out of 5 people, said that their greatest concern was vulnerable people. It wasn't themselves. It was people in our community who are vulnerable and who are struggling. 1 in 5, it was their personal situation that they were facing financial pressure. For 13%, it was their kids' future, intergenerational economic inequity, which is a hot issue at the moment. 17% felt that the government wasn't managing the economy well, and others felt that they were concerned for specific other individuals who are facing financial pressure. And if we talk about those pressure points for those people who were finding cost of living pressures challenging, specifically that related most to groceries, supermarket shopping and the like, electricity and gas and the cost of those, which we know has increased really very significantly in the last 2 or 3 years. Healthcare is about 15%, for about 15% of people is the hot topic. Cost of rentals, again, has really increased significantly in recent years, and it has in fact outstripped increase in wages and things like that. Cost of mortgages, about the same, 12%. Aged care, availability and affordability of aged care was about 7% of people. Petrol as a specific item was Probably less of an issue than it might be for people living in rural and regional centres, but still 7% of people, and childcare was about 2%. So the key points that we took from the survey was that climate change does remain the single most important issue for the people of Kooyong, but only for about 1/4 of people. And cost of living and housing costs are not far behind. We know that from when we tease out that cost of living pressure, that for many people it's not their own situation that is front of mind, but it's more so concern about other people in our community or the next generation. Having said that though, many people are struggling with the high cost of groceries, of electricity and of gas, of healthcare, disability care, aged care, childcare, rents and mortgages. So I guess just to set the scene, people often say to me, well, what have you been concentrating on? And I guess as a federal member, I try to separate my job into, well, two bits which are very much obviously interrelated, but it's what you do in the electorate and in the community to try and support people in your own community and your own constituents, but then what you do at a federal level. And in terms of what I can do from a cost of living pressure, much of that would be at a federal level, realistically. So the first thing is I have been talking to people as much as I can, focusing on what's important to them. And it's very interesting. I think I've done 3 or 4 sessions this week where I just go and stand on a street corner outside a train station and ask people, you know, what do you want to tell me? What do you care about? And every time you hear something different, every time. There's some themes that come back repeatedly, but there's always something new. My team and I have been concentrating on those things, those little levers that you can pull or you can press and have an effect. And most recently, we've been concentrating on the cost of tertiary education, which has really taken off. And many people have been telling us in the community that they just do not know how their kids are ever going to pay off their HECS debts. Now, your HECS debt is not a debt that you have to pay off in a year or 2 years, but we know that now that for the average person with a HECS debt will carry it through 1/3 of their working life. 50% of people who turn 40 still have a HECS debt. We know that people are having smaller families and they're having them later, and they're struggling to buy homes of their own if they've still got a HECS debt, because that is taken into consideration when you try to get a home loan. So HECS debts have become a little bit of a millstone around the neck of the next generation in a way that was not anticipated when the HECS system was brought in 1989. And the way that it influences students and graduates has really changed since 1989. I was still a student then. When it started, it was $1,800 a year. Didn't matter what course you were doing. But now we've got students coming out of secondary and tertiary, so second and third degrees with up to $150,000 in debt, and just not ever seeing how they're going to get rid of that. So we fought hard on that. We started a campaign, ran a petition. 1% of people in Australia signed that petition, 290,000 people. Talked to the government, got a lot of impetus up, and they made some changes in the budget, which will make it easier for students with a debt. Average HECS debt is $26,500, and the students with that level of debt, it'll fall by about $1,200. So it was a good start. There's lots more to do on HECS, and we'll continue on that because education's important, and we do need people to undertake tertiary degrees and get the qualifications that we need. There's lots of disincentives for young people to do that at the moment, so we'll continue on that. But that's just a case in point, and that was just, you know, we're learning the process of how to shift these dials. But we did do that, and it's made a lot of difference to many young people. 3.9 million Australians have a HECS debt. What else have we done? Well, I was the first person to raise in Parliament the question of the changes that the government put in last year, where they made it possible for you to get a 12-month prescription instead of 6-month prescription for more than 300 commonly prescribed drugs. Now, your GP doesn't have to give you a 12-month prescription, but if you've been on a stable dose of a medication for a while and they think it'll be safe, they can do that now, and you can get 2 months' worth instead of 1 month worth of those medications. So you pay less in dispensing fees, you pay less in GP fees. You don't have to go to see the GP as often. You know, it was a suggestion that had actually been floating around for quite some years, but the previous government had looked at it, dropped it, rejected it. I brought it up, other people brought it up. You learn how to push the government, and they did adopt that, and I think it's been well received. You know, if you have to go back to the GP half as often, obviously that's a helpful thing. And then there's other ways that we've learnt. When I say we, I mean the new crossbenchers who aren't members of major parties and have to work out how to have an influence themselves. Other ways that we've learnt to have an influence, and one of them is by giving ideas social licence. So putting them on the agenda, having communities like this say, yeah, okay, yeah, that might be reasonable, you would consider that, and then pushing the government to take action on them. And that was something that I did early on with the stage 3 tax cuts. There was a bit of nervousness from many people about looking at them and saying, look, you know, we're not sure that I didn't think that they were fair, I didn't think they were a great idea, I thought they were inflationary and that they weren't well directed. But, you know, in coming out and saying that, I was saying that I thought that many Australians should get less of a tax cut than they would otherwise have got, and many of my peers were a bit nervous about saying that. And I went out there and said it, some of my peers said it, and then when people were asked the question, many people said, look, I would benefit from it, but I don't know that I need it as much as other people, and I think I'm fine not to get as big a tax cut as I would have got otherwise. And eventually the government, you know, as it does, it said no, 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 yes. It was always our idea, we were always going to do it, it had nothing to do with you. But that's what they do. And we gave the idea, we floated the idea, we put our heads above the parapet and said, look, maybe you should do this, maybe it would be better and fairer. And the government said, oh, let's see how this one lands, you know, and if it had landed badly, they would have said, oh, we would never have done that, that was a terrible idea, but it didn't. And, you know, you can't claim the win for that, and if you ask the government, did I have any influence on that, they'd say no, she did nothing. But you know yourself that, you know, when you go out there and you float these things and the government is watching very carefully how they're reviewed and responded to in the electorates, and there's something that the crossbench can do. We can bring sensible, good ideas to the government and put them in front of them. Might not always get the win, but we can float them and give them social licence. So in terms of the housing crisis, look, we do know that it is very front of mind and hearing a lot about it, even in Kooyong. And I suppose that's another thing to say. People often say to me, people who are not from this part of the world say, it's a wealthy electorate, you know, you guys wouldn't have any homelessness. You wouldn't have anyone who's struggling to pay the bills, you know, it's Kooyong. And I can tell you, you know, Allegra Spender's from the wealthiest electorate in the country, but she's got lots of people in Wentworth who are struggling to pay the bills and who are struggling with homelessness, and Kooyong's just the same. Every electorate in Australia has these problems. And we know that we need to address them, but we also know that there is no easy fix to the housing crisis, and anyone who tells you that there is selling you a line. Now, all of the evidence, and we've looked at this, my team's looked at this, we've talked to experts, we've talked to many, many people over the last 18 months trying to work out where can we make a difference, what can we contribute. All of the evidence is that, you know, there are many pieces to this puzzle. The one single thing that we must do is increase housing supply in this country. I can talk to you about why that is, but it's the one single thing that has to happen to make this thing better. You can't do that overnight. This is a crisis that's 20, 25 years in the making. There's lots of things that have contributed to it, but one of them is our failure to build more housing stock. So the one thing that we have to do is build more housing, and the government is doing some things to get that move forward. They're good, they're not great. There's more we can do. Lots of different ways that we can pull levers and try and make that thing better. What we've done here is we have run a series of housing forums, and Jaden Batty, who works at Servants Housing in the community here, have worked with us last year. We ran a series of meetings. We talked to people, homeowners, people who have a mortgage, people who are renting. We talked to people who are really struggling, and we're putting together a policy that we will take to the next federal election. But there is a long-term crisis with no silver bullets, and what is needed in Kooyong will be different to what's needed in other parts of the world. And as a federal independent, I can't come up with a housing policy that's going to fix the rest of the country, but I can look at every single piece of legislation that comes in front of the House, like things like the Housing Australia Future Fund and other pieces of legislation that we've seen in the last 2 years, and I can criticise it and I can try to constructively improve it with amendments or with suggestions to the government about how to do that, and that's something that I have been concentrating on. We have some ideas about specific things that we think would make a difference, and we'll take them to the next election. So just recently, as you know, we've had a federal budget, and my take on that budget, and I think probably for many people, was that it was a pretty cautious budget. You know, we get locked into the budget lockup in Parliament House on budget day, and we sat down and we went through it all and we went, oh. We're kind of hoping for something big picture, something visionary, something new. Like, for me, one of the things I care about deeply is Medicare, and Medicare needs a once-in-a-generation rehaul, and I'm waiting for someone to come up with that vision. It wasn't there. Similarly, there wasn't a big vision for a big piece of action on housing or on tax reform or all of the things that we need. But having said that, it was cautious, but it was, it had some good things in it. So in the cost of living space, everyone in the government, everyone in Australia, every household gets a $300 energy rebate. There was a 10% increase in the Commonwealth rental assistance payment, and there was those changes in HECS, which will wipe off $3 billion of the $79 billion that Australians owe in their HECS debt. In terms of the climate change, we've got this Future Made in Australia plan, which has a $6.7 billion incentive on tax for development of renewable hydrogen, which is really important, and $1.5 billion for battery and solar production incentives. And I think they're really good things. There's a lot more that we could look for, but it's a good start. In terms of housing, we put through the bill for the Housing Australia Future Fund, and there's been some other housing pieces in the last 2 years, but this budget included another $1.9 billion for social and affordable housing and another $423 million for social housing and homelessness, which is, it's pretty good, but, this is a $700 billion budget. They're not massive investments in things that are really important. Things which are specifically relevant to Kooyong were a $3.3 billion federal investment in the North East Link, which I think is important, and because the federal government now has a significant bit of sway over what happens at the North East Link, I'm hoping that that's going to give us a way to hold the federal government to get the state government to answer to some of the issues that people have about that piece of infrastructure. There was also $100 million for a national fund for active transport options, and we know transport's responsible for 19% of our emissions nationally, and that's increasing quite quickly. So any innovation that will help get people out of combustion engine cars and into active transport will have benefits for climate, for our environment, but also for our health, so it's a great idea. What wasn't in the budget? Well, I was hoping for increased support payments for people who are on job seeker, on the aged care, youth allowance and disability support. That wasn't forthcoming, and that was disappointing. I was hoping for the government to get rid of the Job Ready Graduate Scheme, which essentially doubled the cost of arts degrees under Scott Morrison, which was just something that Scott Morrison did because he didn't like people studying the arts. So I was kind of hoping that the government would get rid of that. But what they have done is they've set up a new tertiary education commission, which is going to look at the price of tertiary degrees and tertiary studies overall. I was looking for a lot more in the cost of living space for GPs in particular, because we know that the rate of bulk billing has fallen significantly, continues to fall. People are paying more and more out of pocket when they go to see their GP, but also see specialists. It's not affordable for many people, and that's having an impact on people's health. So that's something I'm going to continue to work on. I was hoping for more on climate change. I wanted the government to increase the petroleum resources rent tax, which is the super profits tax that we put on fossil fuels that are being exported from this country. They had an opportunity to do that last week. They didn't do it. And that was very disappointing. The government continues to disappoint in some ways. The next budget point, the next dot point there is on point, which is that they continue to approve new coal and gas, and they haven't given us a commitment that they won't continue to do that. In fact, with their future gas strategy, which was announced a couple of weeks ago, we know that they see new gas projects being opened up in this country up until potentially 2050. So that was very disappointing to see. I also wanted the government to support household electrification a bit more. If we help people to electrify their homes, and there's different ways that we can do that, we do need to make some changes to our electricity grid to facilitate that. But we could take a lot of the pressure off industry, and we could all save a lot on our home electricity bills. It would have economic benefits for us as well as health benefits and environmental benefits. But for many people, getting solar, getting an induction stove top, getting a solar heat pump, getting a battery storage, or buying an electric vehicle is prohibitively expensive. It's also really difficult to arrange. It's hard to get the tradies, and it's hard to get quotes, and it's hard to, the actual process is actually quite challenging. And I think we could do a lot to facilitate that. Yeah, there's been a lot of pushback from the country about the new poles and wires that are going to be required for the large-scale renewables projects that are being planned as part of the Rewiring Australia initiative. Those large-scale renewables infrastructure programs are way behind, and if we don't increase our uptake of renewables, we're not going to hit the targets that the government has set. We could do it in another way by helping people electrify, and I think that's something that I will be concentrating on very much in the next 12 months. In terms of housing, there wasn't a whole lot to help incentivise states and local governments to change their planning laws and to get more housing built. If you look overseas, people have looked at ways of doing that in ways which are quite innovative, but the federal government hasn't come at that just yet. And another thing was improved protections for renters. So we're hearing very often that people are having a really bad experience as renters. The rents are being jacked up a lot, very often, unexpectedly. They're being asked to move more often than they would like. They don't have appropriate standards for rental accommodation. We don't have a national standard for rental accommodation. They're all things that we could think about. And just in terms of Kooyong specifically, we've been trying to get funding for completion of the Hawthorn to Box Hill bike path, which is something which has been on the drawing board at a local government and state level since 1993. And everyone wants it. The Burrendale Council wants it, Whitehorse wants it, the state government says they want it, the federal government says, it seems like a great idea, but no one's actually pulling their finger out and finding the funding to do it, and of course it's just in that time getting much more expensive at a rate of knots. But it is something which would be a great thing for the government to finish, and I've been working on that with lots of local cyclists and other groups, and we'll continue to work on that. So that's where we are thus far. Lots to work on. So in the next 12 months, thinking that the next federal election will most likely, I think, be in May of next year, I'll be concentrating on the cost of living stuff, but the climate stuff, and there's lots of intersections there. If we could help people electrify their homes, their cost of living pressures will decrease, because having had solar panels in for 2 or 3 years, I can tell you, your electricity bills are a lot more pleasant when you do, but there's a bit of investment there, and there's changes that have to be made to your home to get those things in place. So I think the place of government is to help people do that. It's not easy and it's not cheap, but it's really worthwhile. and will make a significant difference to us in the long term. So they're the things I will be working on in the next 12 months. But I'm very happy to take questions from all of you about that and about anything else that you would like to speak to. Now I have 2 members of my team here. Tamar's over there. She's got a little mic. Julia's here with a mic. And yeah, got time for questions.
Thank you for tonight. It's interesting when we talk about the housing and the need for more housing. I know of a 4th-year electrical apprentice who's working on, not in our electorate, but on all the new estates you see going out, Clyde or that area there. In the 4 years he's worked on those sites, he said he would not buy one of those houses because the work on them is so shoddy. So I think when we talk about building for, particularly for lower income people, we need to make sure that the word of quality, acceptable. He says in some of those houses in about 3 to 4 years, they'll be
sustainable as well. Yeah.
They'll be almost uninhabitable.
Yeah.
He said the other day he watched a plumber on the site who mismeasured the pipes under the house by this, sorry, as you can't see, this much. And then the plumber said, I can't be bothered going back to fix that. So he just left it, and the floor was going to be built over the top of it. So every time the tap was turned on in the house, the water would run down the pipe into the ground and not connect to the pipe. He said that's not that unusual. So I think we need to be careful about just saying we need to build lots of houses, but I think we now need to really look at going back towards the more inspections. I know it's expensive, but the inspections need to happen. The councils need to be tougher because he said it's not one house would he ever buy in that. And I think we can see it here. He was out looking to buy an apartment, and every apartment he went to, he could see from his experience that everyone had a leaking issue. The skirting boards were all bowed, the paint's are peeling on the window frames. If you look at the balconies above, everyone was leaking. So I think we've got to be really careful about saying build, 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 but it's about the quality of the build.
No, I completely agree.
And the second,
And we don't want to just, and also we don't want to just keep going out is the other thing. We can't keep building suburbs out that don't have the infrastructure, schools, hospitals, and all the other things that you need to make a suburb that people really want to live in.
And
so there's lots of challenges there.
can I add to that one? Being an apprentice, I'll finish in a second, an apprentice as well, if an apprentice in the big build, you're doing very well, but the rip-offs happening with those apprentices out there is quite enormous. In fact, he's got to use his vehicle, this young guy, to go everywhere, from miles across Melbourne. He might do, 60 k's outside Melbourne, and the owners don't pay them to do that. And the TAFE guy the other day said to the group, well, you can always ask, but you will not be told to, if you ask that question, is you're supposed to be paying me petrol money, then you're normally told that sort of response. So it's hard getting skilled labour in Australia, but the disincentive for people to do apprenticeships is decreasing. I'm shutting up now.
Monique, a group that I'm a member of had a paper presentation recently about housing and how we're to improve our housing, and we looked internationally as well as locally. And the thing that stood out for us was that in Australia there are 44 different levels of government, local government, state government, committees on this, committees on that actually are handbrakes on property development. And we need to be able to speed up the process so that we don't have every dog and bone having a say in what happens. The other issue has just been raised. Private certification of buildings is a disaster. It might be quick, but it ain't cheap in the long run. And we've really got to overcome that private certification. We've seen what's happened in Sydney with the multi-storey apartments. We've seen the stupidity of the Western Suburbs boarding house, that because they put a stove in, it couldn't be certified as a boarding house. So there are 10 rooms there that people can't occupy. I think we've got to think differently.
Okay.
You weren't on the radio yesterday, were you? Okay. Similar, someone from North
I'd be interested in having a look at that paper, Rod. I mean, there's lots of things that can be done, yeah. But I think we all agree. It's also, I find it incredibly frustrating. I've been looking at a few things recently where lots of people are just saying, you know, beautiful suburbs like ours, you know, you sell properties are being sold and then being rebuilt with new homes that are, you know, to the edges of the footprint of the piece of land and that aren't necessarily sustainable, but also overly large with loss of tree canopy and the environmental sequelae of that, which include things like heating of the suburbs and things like that. Yeah. It's also true, though, that there are huge numbers of approved buildings, you know, that are ready to go at the moment. A huge number of approvals, even just in Burundara. I've talked to the council about it, and they've said we have a massive number of things which are ticked off. It's all done. They've gone through all the red tape. It's ready to go, but the developers are just not ready to pull the pin and start it yet, which can be because for different reasons. But one of the reasons is just the incredibly issues with workforce, but also issues with just the significant increase in the cost of materials for building. So there's so many different pieces to this puzzle. And the other piece I know someone's going to raise is the fact that 12% of the homes in this part of the world are empty. And if someone can tell me how to fix that problem or address that problem in a way which is sensitive to people who might want to leave their home empty for a year or two, but which addresses the fact that some places are empty for years at a time, yeah, I'd love to talk to them. Squatting. I did not. So that's very English of you. Natalie Dixon.
Oh, okay.
Local hero.
We'll come
I just wanted to ask whether you are talking to the council, like you're talking about in housing advocacy at a federal level, but the local council could be a lot more creative in its use of resources making available for housing. For example, creative use of airspaces above car parks. So one of the issues about housing is often finding land, and land is the most expensive part of the housing projects. And there's often within local councils lots of land owned by councils that is not used creatively and which the airspace above could be allocated for housing. For example, like if you look at a car park space, you can actually redevelop a car park space a couple of levels up and on top of that create housing. The Kew Library is going to be renovated and rebuilt soon. Why not add social housing project levels above the Kew Library? Like the City of Burundara has the lowest public housing and social housing of any municipality. And my question is, I feel like the council needs to be pushed a little bit to be creative. And the sad thing over generations, if you look back 30 years, the City of Burundara used to have the second highest rate of rooming houses of any municipality. It has a very strong history of housing people with mental illnesses and other disabilities, a really big history. And over those last 30 years, we've seen a massive amount of housing lost for those vulnerable communities. And I just feel like there could be a lot of creative use of resources that are here in partnership with other bodies like federal and state to create housing. But I feel like there's not a lot of impetus.
Yeah, it's true. I'm very keen to work with the council on this and other issues. I have talked to them about the site in Denmark Street, the Vic Road site, which is up for redevelopment. And I think that it could be redeveloped in a way that could include, it's a massive site, close to Kew Junction, close to public transport. It could be redeveloped in a way that did include a significant amount of social and affordable housing. It has to be done really sensitively, and I know that there are real concerns that in some parts of the electorate there are a number of people who are really struggling, who are often out on the street, and some people are finding that quite confronting. I think we can do it. I think you're right, we can do it. It does take a bit of impetus. I'd be very keen to work with you on that. And I think you're right, there's lots of ways that we can do things innovatively and with a bit of imagination and flair in a way that it's got to be well designed, it's got to be sustainable, not putting up, horrible things with unsafe cladding that are going to fall down in 5 to 10 years. We don't want that. But yeah, I'm happy. I am trying to work with council on that sort of stuff. being sensitive to the fact that many parts of this world, this electorate have heritage overlays, and people have chosen to live here because of the natural advantages and all of that. And I'm the same, I feel the same way, but I still think we could accommodate more people more sensitively. And having visited some of those rooming houses and things that you know much, much better than I have, I think we could do better by the people who are already in our community and living in them.
I think, the worry about having social housing, if we think about it...
Sorry, I just get excited.
We worry, if people are worrying about having social housing in Burundara, in some ways we've got social housing out on our streets anyway. Camberwell Junction, in my lifetime, never had homeless people, and it's now got homeless people all through the streets there. And what better way to resolve that problem than to actually provide some decent housing and affordable housing. And I do love your focus on sustainable, well-built. And I think we do need to accept that we need to go up. So I like that idea of using our airspace, because that way we really can build quality places with good facilities. So if we used that car parking space, the Vic Roads area, there's so much you can do with greenery and just making sure that gets put into the planning so that it looks fantastic. It's actually absorbing a whole lot of the urban heat and the carbon dioxide, and creating a beautiful thing to look at. If you go into where the old paper mill was in Fairfield, it doesn't look so crash hot from the main road corner, but if you actually go into that block, it's absolutely stunning with all its garden and it's all its Indigenous and native planting, which is, again, bringing habitat and solving so many problems all in one.
And I think, I agree with you. And I know some people are a bit nervous about the Denmark Road site, but I think we could do it well. I have heard just this week, people have approached me about the homeless people in Glenview Road, Hawthorn. It's been an issue for a little while, but Camberwell, Burke Road, and today was Eastbourne. Just people, they said, I've never seen a homeless person in this part of Kooyong, and there's more and more people around, and what are we doing to help? We do need to do more. We do.
Just on that, somebody mentioned squatting. It's not a joke. I know that in the Netherlands, I'm not too sure the details, but if a dwelling is empty for a certain period of time, squatters can move in legally. And they do it.
Yes. I'm aware, and of course there's the rules about adverse possession, that if you move in Australia, where if you move in and you're there for a certain amount of time, you can actually claim the home. And I'm aware of one quite remarkable home in this electorate, which was claimed by someone a couple of years ago, and I mean, it takes quite a long time, but this person, they lived there for 12 years, I think, and then, put their hand up and it was theirs. It was quite remarkable. I think I'm really, we've talked about this as a team a lot, and it's not about victimising people who have a home and leave it empty for 2 or 3 years, but someone was saying to me today that the home next to them had been empty for 27 years, and I think that is getting to the point. And people are concerned about homes that have become uninhabitable, and I know the council is trying to address it, and the state government are trying to address it, but it is an ongoing issue, not just in this part of the world. When you've got people sleeping in their cars in the electorate, the fact that there are homes that have been empty for 10 or 15 years, it's not right, and we need to find ways of addressing that.
I'm going to take us on another topic. With Mr Dutton's pending announcement of his proposal of nuclear sites to generate energy, I'm just wondering what your thoughts... I know it's a massive topic, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts about proposed Australia having nuclear energy.
Well, I believe that climate change, if we go back to the beginning, I believe that climate change is real, it's upon us, it's demonstrable, we're seeing it now, we're seeing the effects of it globally. We need to address it quickly and effectively. Everyone does. I think it's I've said this before, it's the global challenge of our time. I don't know if you saw a couple of weeks ago, there's the International Panel of Climate Change, the IPCC scientists, 80% of them believe that we're not going to avoid the cutoff of 1.5 degrees of global warming, which people have said is, you know, the cutoff point for really significant climate-related adverse events by 2030. Some of them said that, and the Australian Academy of Science has said that they think that we're going to hit 2.5. At 2.5, much of Northern Australia would be uninhabitable. Now, without being an alarmist, we are on that trajectory and we have to do things to address it. So I think we have to transition away from fossil fuels and from putting carbon dioxide and methane into our atmosphere as quickly as we can. Now, I think the quickest and easiest way of doing that is via renewables. At this point, and electricity generated from renewables, wind and solar, is the cheapest electricity that goes into our grid here. I don't have a problem with nuclear in and of itself, nuclear energy in and of itself. It works really well in parts of the world like Japan, on the whole, and Northern Europe, who don't have what we have, which is the world's best solar and wind resources. But because we have those, I don't see that we need to go to nuclear. There's a long lead-in to getting nuclear power. You know, minimum of 7 or 8 years to build a nuclear reactor, even if you had everything in place today, which we don't as a country. But it's also incredibly expensive, and the Gen Cost report that came out yesterday from the CSIRO showed that. But we've seen it again and again, that evidence is there. So I just don't think it's the right way to go because it's too slow and it's too expensive. And so I just, on the face of it, the electricity that would come from a nuclear reactor if we started, so if the whole country said tomorrow, great, let's do it, let's go there, we wouldn't have one up and going for at least 10 years, and it would be so expensive that no one would want that electricity. I think by then we'll have much, much better alternatives. So it's not it's a technology agnostic but economic argument if nothing else.
Maybe we could swap the subs.
Yeah, so the whole AUKUS thing it's interesting. I mean, I've met with members from the government, from Defence last week, talking to them about that. The AUKUS plan is not just about the subs. The subs are a really big part of it, obviously, and $370 billion worth of taxpayers' money. But there is quite a lot of technology exchange involved in AUKUS as well, and some of my colleagues on the crossbench who've been involved with that side of things have actually been really impressed with it, with some of the technology exchange that we will have, particularly with the US, as part of phase 2 of AUKUS. But yeah, I mean, I don't think I've met anyone who thinks that the nuclear submarines are a great idea. Not because we don't need to defend this country, of course we do, but there's just so many moving pieces in the purchase and building and delivery of those, many of which are outside our control, you know, changes of government in the UK and the US, that it just does engender a significant degree of uncertainty about whether it will ever happen. Sorry, Jane.
Hi, thanks, Mon. You were talking before about the electrification, and you know, locally we're all trying to do what we can with solar panels, etc., etc. I've been told, and I don't know it in detail, but the new Q-Rec pool that was put off because the roof collapsed and everything else, but apparently that's going to be gas heated, all the swimming pools and everything else. And the council have been asked about that, and they've said, oh no, that's in their contract and they can't change anything. It seems that it was done so long ago, yeah, perhaps gas seemed an okay option way back then, but it doesn't seem like it's an okay option now. Is there something, surely there's something, us, who can do something, because that's going to be huge, having that massive facility gas powered.
Yeah, so the Q-Rec, for those people who don't know, it's up just on New Kew Junction, massive pool, and it's being rebuilt, and When was it that the roof fell down? It was about early last year, about 12 months ago? 2 years ago, okay, so hence it's now known as the Q wreck. And the council is still mired in arguments with the various parties related to that. So the builder, the architect, the person who certified the plans to say that it wasn't going to fall down, obviously it has fallen down. And so it's actually there's an ongoing dispute about that. And we have asked them to consider changing it. Yes, you're right, the plan at the moment is for a massive gas heat pump for the pool and things. And yeah, so from an environmental point of view, it's not going to be great, but also gas is expensive now. It's only going to get more expensive in the future. So from an economic point of view, it does not seem like the right way to go. Other options, we could put in other forms of heat pump that would be much more environmentally sound. Might be more expensive in the first place, but over the long term would definitely be advantageous. The council is doing retrofitting of those sorts of heat pumps at Burundara and another Ashburton as well. So they are in the process of changing over, retrofitting to that sort of thing at 2 other council-run pools at the moment. Their rationale for not reconsidering the situation at Kew is the fact that it's the ongoing subject of these legal matters, and they can't sort of jump ship mid-flight, as it were. We're in the process of trying to work with them on that, because I think actually, yes, they do need to sort out these issues that they've had about, who's responsible for the cost and the delay and all that sort of stuff, but then that would be the perfect time to change the plans. So we will continue to work on that, and we'll probably be out and about getting community support for that in the next 12 months.
Can I cheekily add that I think that a local climate group may have a petition on that topic? Yes, there is one.
Yes, so I think various sources of pressure on council related to that would be appropriate, because it's apart from anything else, gas is going to be so expensive in 5 or 10 years. We don't want to be paying for the heating of the Q wreck via gas. We really don't. The good people, ratepayers of Burundara should push back against that, I think.
Monique, you said earlier you might say something about immigration.
Yes. So my take on immigration is fairly middle of the road, really. I know that Mr Dutton has pushed back on immigration pretty hard, and Angus Taylor, the Shadow Treasurer, yesterday pushed back on it, went back for it, but I don't know if anyone saw that press conference, that thing at the National Press Club. Clearly there's a little bit of incoherence there in terms of what the opposition's opinion on migration is. But the bottom line is that the opposition at the federal level thinks that immigration is too much and that we need to cut it pretty significantly. My take on that is that we are a country of migrants. Our economic growth has always been predicated on the basis of immigration. The evidence, such as it is and our students, foreign students, international students, are one of our single biggest contributors to our economy. I think they're 3rd or 4th in terms of the things that generate to and contribute to our economy, and I think that they contribute a lot more than that socially as well. And I don't want us to stop being a country of migrants, because I think we are the better for being that. Having said that, there was an overshoot in immigration after COVID. I don't think anyone would deny that. The government hasn't denied that. And there was a catch up and there was an overshoot. And the government has already taken action on that in terms of changing some of the rules and around visas and things like that of students that have come in. And I think it's appropriate to tap the brakes, to slow down immigration in the way that has been forecast by the government. But, at the same time, I saw some fascinating figures yesterday from the Department of Health about the number of nurses that we have in this country and the shortfall that we are going to have by 2030. We've already got a shortfall of about 70,000 nurses in this country. It's going to be 140,000 by 2030. So we need nurses. And the fact is that many of the jobs in the care sector, like aged care and childcare, are taken by people who are immigrants to this country. It's not that they're not taking the jobs of other people who want them, they're taking jobs that those sectors can't fill otherwise. So, and we need skilled immigrants to build the homes that we need. So I think it's just a matter of being reasonable and moderate and inclusive. I think that Mr. Dutton, I'll be frank, I think that he's using this as a bit of a wedge politically, and it's an important issue. It shouldn't, that we can treat with a bit more sensitivity than that. The gentleman at the back, I think.
I'd just like to thank you for your work on behalf of Julian Assange. Thank you for that. And if we do have a double dissolution federal election, do you think we could have single topic free Julian senators?
Possible. Well, I'm not sure actually. I mean, it's an interesting one. I think Julian Assange. Hopefully, I think what happened this week was encouraging. I think we live in a time where free speech and the media are really at risk. It's a very time where there's been a lot of loss of social cohesion, a lot of fragmentation, and so many things which are dividing rather than uniting us. Julian Assange and his actions have been problematic in some ways in the past, but I think that we need to protect the freedom of the press. There's some really important legal and moral issues there, and he does now have broad-based support across the Australian political spectrum. The Prime Minister's been really supportive of getting him out. I feel quite optimistic about that.
I'm going to say something right here. Now, the digital ID bill and the e-commerce staff,
Sorry, can we just take turns?
We're taking turns.
Simon, can we just take turns?
Okay, well, I disagree. I don't think the digital ID bill, which we can talk about, has anything to do with freedom of speech. I don't believe that that's the case.
It'll introduce social credit system, and whereby if our political views are held against us, then we'll be locked out of the system, which is happening in China, which is slowly spreading around here in Australia.
Okay, well, I don't agree with you, sir. Quite apart from anything else, the digital ID bill brings in a way of having a digital ID that will hopefully help protect all of us from scams and from being ripped off. It is voluntary. Yeah. I think we're going to have to agree to disagree on that one. Caroline?
Yes, Mon, you mentioned that when you were standing at the last election 2 years ago, there was nothing about cost of living in those days. It wasn't a problem. And there certainly wasn't so much a concern about housing. And there was no problem at all with, at that point, of immigration, because we were so desperate for people to come in because we didn't have enough people to do the work. And I'm just thinking there seems to be a lack of proportion, because the cost of living is not something that's unique to Australia. In fact, it's a hell of a lot worse elsewhere in the world. And so I'm just wondering why everything always seems so local and blamed on the local government when there seems to be, why is it people don't sort of see the global?
Yes. Yeah, actually, but that actually doesn't bring me back to one question, the previous question about immigration. I think a lot of people blaming the housing shortage on foreign students, but the housing shortage became a real issue during COVID, where we didn't have foreign students, which sort of largely points to the fact that it's not a big contributor.
Just wondering if there's any hope for the two whistleblowers, the tax fellow and the foreign affairs fellow.
The question was about the two whistleblowers. Did you mean David McBride and Richard Boyle? Well, David McBride last week was sentenced to jail, and that case is going to go to appeal. With Richard Boyle, I think there are some real concerns about his case. He whistleblowed about issues with the ATO, and I think there are real concerns there. My colleague Helen Haynes has a private member's bill about whistleblowing, and the government has, and we're asking for a whistleblower commissioner, and we do need to protect whistleblowers in this country, there's no doubt about it. There's also a piece of legislation, the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which is up for significant revision, which I'm hoping will happen before the end of this parliamentary term, and that will also address that issue. Yeah, I think Richard Boyle has been treated, very unfairly.
Looks like we might be done. Questions? Should we? Oh,
We're done?
one last one?
Last one. Okay.
Congratulations on the changes to HECS as the father of 2 university students.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
All my team, Max.
And
Max is the one who started the petition, which ended up being a stroke of genius, I have to say. That's Max there. Put your hand up, Max. Thank you, Max.
And congratulations to whoever's put the posters up on Earl Street recognising that. I'm not sure who that was. I'm lucky enough to have been in the last year before HECS was introduced, and I'm a real believer of free education. It's what the country should be built on. Is it a fair system? It just does not feel like it's a fair system. When you said that Scott Morrison didn't like arts degrees, so he charged it accordingly, it feels to me that the universities are earning big bottom lines from overseas students, from research, etc., and we're still making our students pay a significant amount of money.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And again, this is not something which was on the agenda at the last federal election. And like many things, I've had to really upskill myself on it just in the last 12 months. It was probably about February or March of last year where people started coming to the crossbenchers and saying, did you know that indexation is going to result in this, and this is how indexation works, and this is how it's going to affect us? And we were like, oh, that's not quite right. And I'll tell you the truth, when we took that to the Federal Education Minister and we said, Jason, do you realise that the indexation occurs on the 1st of May, but the credits, the payments that people have made in that calendar year don't get credited to their account until after the end of the tax year, so that you might have actually paid off all the money that you owe before the 1st of May, but you still get hit with this extra bill. He said, oh, I mean, it was, and I don't blame him because it is really complicated, but I think it hadn't just landed with people because indexation or the CPI increase, inflation had been so low for many years that it just people hadn't realised it. And recently so I've ended up doing a lot of reading about the university's Accord report that came out early in this year. It was really interesting on that. I was actually on Radio National with Bruce Chapman, who was an academic at Sydney Uni, who was kind of the architect of HECS recently, and I asked him about it. I said, did you want this? Is this what you thought? Is this what you envisaged? And he said, no. It's changed over time, and there's been various tinkering. Knowing Kooyong, probably half of you are involved with it, in terms because you're all academics and whatever, but he said it's changed over time. So initially it was $1,800 a year, didn't matter what degree you were doing, and then it started to increase so that expensive courses cost more, which is not unreasonable. But then you've got people who don't like the arts and say, right, we're going to double the cost of that, even though that didn't reflect either the cost of running the course or your earning potential once you graduate from the course. But at the same time, there are other things that have happened. So it used to be that you could get an arts degree or a science degree, and it would take you 3 years, and then you could get a job. But now you need, in many instances, second or third degrees to get the same job that you needed, that you could have gotten in the 80s and the 90s with much less. And then there were the unintended consequences. So in about 1989, when HECS started, nursing and social work became courses that you did at university. So previously, they weren't, but now they're university and you get HECS and it's more expensive. And they tend to be female dominated, whereas men going into the vet sector with an apprenticeship might be receiving a stipend while they're studying. Now you've got women going in and doing these female-dominated courses, often graduating and then taking unpaid leave for parental leave and things like that, and suddenly realising that their debt's going up quite significantly. So HECS does disadvantage women. There's all these sort of unintended consequences that have come out over time. And there's lots of things that need to be done about that. And the problem with the Job Ready Graduate Scheme, where Scott Morrison, he literally doubled the cost of an arts degree overnight, is, I have to be honest, the universities said, okay, because they made more from it. So they didn't fight back as hard as they could have. So there's a bit to do. And I think it'll take a while to unravel some of that. But the first thing is, the prac placements, which is another thing that we're advocating for, that the government put payment to help people doing practical placements during their training. They've put that in. It's not enough, and not everyone gets it. But it's a bit of a start. It's recognising the fact that we need nurses, we need radiographers, we need psychologists, we need social workers. You have to support people while they're doing that training, and we will all get the benefit from that down the track. So there's a lot to be done in that space. Margaret?
So what can you do in terms of tax reform? Because universities... What can you do in terms of tax reform? Because looking at universities, they became the business model because funding was cut. I believe in free education, and you pay tax according to what you earn, so that a low-paid childcare or aged care worker pays less tax. And if you earn a lot of money, because you're in a high-paying job, and that's how you pay for your education after the event. And then the tax that you pay funds the university. And you're not a business model university anymore. So where is your tax reform happening?
Well, the one thing that we could do, and it was incredibly frustrating last week that the Greens actually waved this through, was to increase the super profits tax on fossil fuel exports from this country. So, we're the second biggest fossil fuel exporter in the world. We make much, much, much less from the oil and gas that we dig up. It's a finite resource, we won't get it back. And then we allow multinationals to ship it overseas and sell it at great expense. And we don't get enough for that. And the reality is that if we were able to get the appropriate return on that, we could have more fair education, healthcare, childcare, aged care, and those things that most of us want.
So when you hold the balance of power after the next election, what are you going to do?
Yeah. Look, I think, one of the things I will go to the next election saying, as I've said last time, was that we can't have new coal and gas, and we should be getting the appropriate benefit from our finite resources, whether that be oil and gas or critical minerals. And we shouldn't be subsidising fossil fuel industries, which we still do, to the order of $14.5 billion a year. There are things that we can do. The government has to have the certainty that that's where its priorities should be. And perhaps if there is a balance of power situation, the crossbench could help them with that. I think we've got one more question at the back.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation earlier. You just mentioned critical minerals, and so as part of the recent federal budget, there's a 10% tax credit that the government is going to offer to corporations which are involved in mining critical minerals. And as you know, it is very important to the energy transition overall. But from a budgetary balancing perspective, where is this money really going to come from? We've had a surplus largely on the back of strong commodity prices, not going to last forever. So why do we not really have an effective carbon tax policy? Surely these corporations can afford not taking the tax credit, right? But they do need to be incentivized. So where is this country really going in from a perspective of applying a carbon tax policy which will help fund the energy transition in future?
Yeah, so a carbon tax is obviously something that's come up again and again in the past, and at a federal level, that phrase causes people like me to go white and a little bit shaky at the knees. It's not something that people want to talk about, but there are many economists, as you know, who feel that is the route that we should be going down and that we should be thinking about that. And I do think that we need to look at our economy and future-proof it as best we can, knowing that our ability, as you say, to benefit from things like oil and gas and critical minerals is finite. And we have to work out how best to do that. I've been on the record in the past as saying that I think that they're discussions that we do need to have the courage to have. And when I talked about social licence earlier, that's the sort of thing that people like on the crossbench are saying, you know, not gotcha questions like, do you believe in this, or would you support that, or what about this one, what about this one? It's more about saying, okay, we've got this issue. We've also got issues with intergenerational inequity that we're not addressing as a country. How are we going to make things look better in 10, 20, 30 years' time? And carbon tax might be a part of that. There's other ways to do it as well, but I agree with you. It is something that we need to have the courage to talk about.
Is making squillions. We've got a few other families across Australia who are making billions and billions out of the Australian minerals and Australian land. And I know it's very hard to tackle, but I really think, how can a few people in Australia have so much when there are so many people in Australia who have so little? And I really think it's a tough thing, and whoever wants to bring it up, I'll get their head chopped off somewhere. But I really think it's inequitable in our country to have people who have so much and others have so little, and seem to have these amazing lifestyles when there are people going hungry. So
what the government can certainly do, I think, is look at things like our tax system and just ensure that people are paying tax that is appropriate based on the earnings that they have and the profits that their companies make, which is not something that we always succeed at. So, one last one. Okay, very last one, Natalie.
Oh, sorry. It's sort of semi-related and quite a different topic. I'm just wondering about the waste of money that we spend on prisons in Australia, and there never seems to be a lot of interest amongst politicians about looking at prison reform, in that we are increasingly incarcerating at much higher rates our population, even though our crime rate is declining, and that nearly 40% of our prisons are full of people who commit very low-level offending and non-violent crimes, and they cost us $147,000 a year to incarcerate. And it just, I don't know, it seems to be a continued area that gets overlooked because there's a constant law and order line. It's a very emotive issue. Politicians want to play into the issue rather than looking at the facts. And in fact, a couple of years ago, the right-wing think tank even said, you know what, we don't get much bang for our buck in prisons. Fiscally, it's a really poor system, regardless of compassion. But fiscally, our prisons are really poor systems. But socially, they're incredibly poor systems in that they keep on pumping out. And there's a direct correlation between poverty and incarceration rates. Pretty much a third of the people who end up in prison are usually homeless 30 days before they enter prison. And we know they come back out into poverty, back out into homelessness, and back into low-level reoffending. And I'm just wondering whether there's been any conversations amongst yourself and other independents about somebody finally looking at our stupid prison system in Australia. I've worked in the prisons I did 4.5 years there, and I work with people now who are in rooming houses who come out of prisons directly into a rooming house with very little support, and it just seems such a waste of human resources and a waste of fiscal resources. And I'm just wondering if that's an area you've had any conversations around or interested in looking at, because the reality is with cost of living, more people will be committing low-level offending, And I can only see that we're going to end up punishing people and sticking them in prison systems that only make them more likely to reoffend at higher levels.
All right, Natalie. So I think I said earlier that every time I have a meet and greet, someone brings up something I've never heard about before. You've just done it today, so good on you. It's never come up. That's the first time I've ever heard that question raised. All right, great. Okay, we can talk. You know where to find me. We'll talk. But yeah, no, it's not been something, an issue that people have raised with me at all. There's been a few things around the judicial system, but it's been about provision of healthcare and stuff like that within it. But I haven't heard that question raised or that concern before, so I've taken on board and we'll talk about it. All right, so thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. Oh yeah, sorry. Okay, I've got a big reveal, and you guys are in. Okay, so my next is there another one? Oh, another one first. Okay, all right. Okay, upcoming events. Okay, yes. Okay, so we've got a couple of upcoming events in the electorate, and these are with Services Australia, who are really kind and very generous in sharing their expertise about things. We've had one recently, we've had a couple about understanding your pension and superannuation and things, but here's another one on understanding super with Services Australia. If you've got any questions about your super, and we'll have people there who'll talk to you about that, take you through it. And the other one is understanding aged care fees and charges. Service, very complicated area, very difficult, having tried to negotiate myself. I know it's very, very challenging for many people. Both of these events will be in English and Mandarin, is that right? Or just both? Yes, okay, so we'll have them on the day, and if you scan the QR, I'll have the date for that. There will be in my newsletters and things as well, but they're upcoming, and we'll have a session in English and then a session in Mandarin on the same day. Keen to have people attend them. They're really usually very useful. And then the big reveal on the next town hall, which is going to be in August, is I will be accompanied by Jackie Lambie. So it will be fun. And it will not be boring. So that one is going to sell out, or not sell out, but book out very, very quickly. So get in early. Jackie is everything that she appears on the television. She's a forthright, clear thinker and challenging and interesting, and she's a friend, and I'm not lucky to have her as a friend because she's we're very different people, but I respect her contribution to Parliament very much, and so we'll be in conversation on the 11th of August? 11th of August, yes. So if you can, get in early, because I think that one will book out. I can't imagine that people won't want to come and hear what Jackie has to say. Thank you for coming tonight. Any sort of follow-up feedback to the office is really very well received. We're very grateful for feedback. If there's anything that you would like us to do or put on the Bring Your Bills session that we had earlier, it was the first time we'd done something like that. I think it landed pretty well. If people got feedback on that, we'd really appreciate it. We want to give people what they need, and we're very grateful for your attendance tonight. Thank you for coming.